My doctor said my heart needed $5,000 to keep beating, but my daughter, Jessica, refused. A few weeks later, she posted a picture buying her mother-in-law a $250,000 car with the caption, "For the most wonderful mom in the world." Have you ever felt your voice become invisible, even when you were speaking about the most important thing in your life? Hello, my friends. My name is Sophia, and I'm so glad to be here with you. Whether you're listening from a familiar armchair in California or maybe taking a walk on a beach in the Carolinas, let me know you're here with a like and a comment about where you're from. It helps to know I'm not just talking into the void. My story begins on a Tuesday morning here in Florida, the kind of morning where the air is already thick with humidity before the sun has even climbed halfway up the sky. It was the day I realized the beating in my chest was no longer the rhythm of life, but a warning. Dr. Miller's office always had the same smell, a scent of old paper files, and the clean, sharp bite of antiseptic. For 20 years, it had been a comforting, reliable smell. It was the scent of reassurance for me and my late husband, Robert. But on that Tuesday, everything felt different. The air felt heavier, the familiar scent laced with something I couldn't name. Apprehension, perhaps. The worn leather of the patient chair felt slick against my palms. Dr. Miller, a kind man with gentle eyes, who had seen Robert and me through everything, from the seasonal flu to Robert's final, brave battle, clipped an X-ray onto the light box on the wall. The fluorescent light hummed to life, illuminating the ghostly shapes of my own bones, a stark, black and white map of my own mortality. He pointed a pen to a blurry spot near my heart, a little shadow that held so much power. "Sophia," he said, his voice low and soft, but carrying the weight of a verdict. "We need to act. A pacemaker." I listened as he explained the procedure, the risks, the recovery. I heard the words, but my mind couldn't quite assemble them into a clear picture. It was all a blur of medical terms and reassurances. My focus snagged, sharp and sudden, on a single number he mentioned, $5,000. That was the copay, the amount that my Medicare, after covering everything it possibly could, would not touch. $5,000. For a retired schoolteacher living on a meager pension and what was left of Robert's Social Security, that number wasn't just a number. It was a mountain. It was an impassable, towering wall between me and the steady, reliable beat my heart was supposed to have. I thought of all the years Robert and I had scrimped and saved, the vacations we'd postponed, the little luxuries we'd foregone, all for a sense of security that now felt like a distant dream. I nodded, a mechanical gesture that felt disconnected from my body, thanked him, and walked out into the blinding Florida sun, the number echoing with every unsteady beat of my heart. I must have sat at my small kitchen table for hours, just staring at the old rotary-style phone on the wall. It was a sunny yellow, a color I'd once found cheerful. Now it just seemed loud, an obnoxious splash of color in my gray world. My hand would reach for the receiver, my fingers hovering over the cool, smooth plastic, and then retreat as if it were hot to the touch. Calling Jessica was never easy. My daughter, my only child, lived in a world that spun at a different speed than mine. A world of power lunches, quarterly reports, and important calls that were never from her mother. Finally, shame gave way to fear. I took a deep, shaky breath, the kind that doesn't quite fill your lungs, and dialed the number I knew by heart. When Jessica answered, the background wasn't quiet. It was a cacophony of clinking glasses, the murmur of polite laughter, and the low hum of dozens of conversations, a fancy mall maybe, or an upscale restaurant. I could almost smell the perfume and the money through the phone. My own voice sounded thin and frail in comparison as I explained what Dr. Miller had said. I tried to keep it simple, factual, to avoid any hint of the panic that was clawing at my throat. There was a pause on her end, a beat of silence that felt a mile long. Then, a theatrical sigh crackled through the line, a sound I knew all too well. It was the sound of her patience wearing thin. "Mom?" she said, and the word was heavy with exasperation. "You're always overreacting. It's probably just some doctor in that small town of yours trying to squeeze money out of seniors. It happens all the time. I think you should get a second opinion, somewhere more reputable." Her words weren't just a refusal, they were a dismissal. A swift, invisible blade that didn't just deny my request for help, but questioned my reality. It undermined my trust in the doctor who had held my hand as I'd said goodbye to my husband. It planted a seed of doubt, not in him, but in my own mind. Was I just a foolish old woman? Was my own mortality just an overreaction? I hung up the phone, the click of the receiver settling into the quiet kitchen with a sense of finality. A profound weight settled in my chest, heavier than the physical ailment that was threatening me. I looked around the small, familiar space, the worn linoleum floor, the faded floral curtains I'd sewn myself 30 years ago. Every single thing in this house, from the sturdy oak table to the mismatched coffee mugs, had been bought with my teacher's salary and Robert's wages from the factory. We had never had much, but we had always had enough. My mind drifted back to the Great Recession in 2008. I remember the sleepless nights, the fear that coiled in our stomachs as we watched the news. We were terrified. I remember one evening, Robert came home from the factory, his face gray with exhaustion, and told me they were cutting hours. We sat at this very table, not speaking, just holding hands, the silence thick with worry. But we faced it together. We cut back on everything. We planted a vegetable garden in the backyard until my back ached, and Robert's hands were permanently stained with soil. We ate a lot of tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. We patched our old shoes instead of buying new ones. We made it through. Those lean years taught us the value of $1, but more than that, they taught us the value of preparedness, of having a little something set aside for a rainy day. Jessica grew up in the shadow of that frugality. She knew what it was to have less. She had understood once. But now the woman on the phone, my daughter, spoke of $5,000 as if it were a trivial sum, and my life or death fear was nothing more than a nuisance, an inconvenient interruption to her day. A few hours later, trying to escape the oppressive silence of the house, I picked up my tablet and scrolled through Facebook. It's a habit, a way to see other people's lives unfolding, to feel a flicker of connection without having to speak. And that's when I saw it. A new post from Jessica. My thumb froze over the screen. She was at a wine tasting. Her smile was wide and brilliant as she stood beside a group of immaculately dressed people, her world away from mine. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of champagne, and her friends, all sharp angles and expensive handbags, laughed at something she'd said. She held up a glass of deep red wine, the crystal catching the light. That single glass of wine she was holding probably cost more than my groceries for an entire week. The contrast hit me like a physical blow. My raw, paralyzing fear on one end, her carefree, laughing existence on the other. It felt like I was looking through a window into another universe. a universe I didn't belong to, a universe my daughter now inhabited so completely she'd forgotten where she came from. The feeling of being left behind, of being a relic from a life she was ashamed of, it hurt more than the physical ache in my chest. I closed the tablet, the screen going dark. The silence in the house rushed back in, but now it wasn't just quiet, it was terrifying. 2 days later, Jessica showed up at my door unannounced. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. It looked like armor, sleek and powerful and impenetrable. She didn't hug me. She didn't even ask how I was feeling. She walked straight past me, her expensive leather tote bag swinging at her side, to the kitchen table, where I left the folder with my medical papers. "Let me see," she said, her tone brisk as she slipped on a pair of expensive-looking reading glasses. She flipped through the pages with a brusque efficiency, the crisp rustle of the paper the only sound in the room. Her eyes scanned the numbers in medical terms with the detached air of an auditor reviewing a company's flawed expense report. She never once looked at me. "What's this charge for? Are you sure you understood the doctor correctly, Mom?" Each question was a needle prick to my dignity, a subtle suggestion that I was either too old or too simple to grasp the situation. This wasn't a daughter's concern. It was an interrogation. It was a cross-examination of my cognitive abilities. She had taken my mortality, my fear, my vulnerability, and turned it into a cold, clinical business transaction. I was no longer her mother in need. I was a questionable line item, a potential liability. After she left, leaving a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the air conditioning, I felt utterly drained, exhausted to my bones. I walked to the window, thinking I needed some air, a look at the garden Robert had so lovingly tended, but my feet took me somewhere else. I went to the old wooden bookshelf in the living room, my fingers tracing the spines of familiar books until they found it. An old, worn book of poetry by Maya Angelou. It had been a source of comfort for me for so many years, a gift from Robert. I didn't open it. I didn't read a single word. I simply pulled the book from the shelf, and using the sleeve of my soft wool cardigan, I began to gently wipe the thin layer of dust from its cover. It was a slow, deliberate motion. I could feel the solidness of the book's spine beneath my fingers, the history in its worn pages. Wiping that book clean wasn't just a physical act. It was a way of reconnecting with something solid, something strong. It was a way of touching the resilience and the grace that those poems represented. It was a quiet reminder to myself that even when my voice was ignored, even when I felt invisible, my spirit still had a place to anchor itself. One morning, a week or so later, I was trying to fill out an important insurance form. The print was tiny, a sea of black ink that swam before my eyes. I reached for my reading glasses on the end table, but they weren't there. I checked my purse, the kitchen counter, the nightstand by my bed. Nothing. I searched the entire house, my movements growing more frantic, a growing knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. They were gone. And then I remembered, with a sinking feeling, the last time I had used them, in Jessica's car, on the way home from church the previous Sunday. My heart sank at the thought of having to call her again, of having to ask for something so small, so essential. I felt like a beggar. When I finally called, her response was casual, almost breezy. "Oh, your glasses?" she said, as if just remembering. "I think they're still in the car. I've been so busy, Mom. I'll try to swing by this weekend." But the weekend came and went, and Jessica never appeared. The insurance form had a deadline. In the end, I had to walk next door and ask my neighbor Martha to help me. I sat at her kitchen table, the scent of her cinnamon coffee in the air, feeling a hot flush of shame creep up my neck as she patiently read the tiny print aloud for me. I felt like a child, completely dependent on the kindness of others for something as basic as reading. It was a subtle, insidious form of control. It was a quiet reminder from Jessica that my very ability to see the world clearly was now subject to her whims. It was my grandson Leo's 8th birthday. For a week, I'd sat in Robert's old armchair every evening, the rhythmic click-clack of my knitting needles a comforting sound in the quiet house. I was knitting him a sweater, a deep ocean blue, his favorite color. The party was at Jessica's house, a place so large and minimalist it always felt cold to me, devoid of the clutter and warmth of a life truly lived. The walls were white, the furniture was modern and uncomfortable, and there wasn't a single photograph of me or Robert anywhere. The air was filled with the shrill laughter of children and the polite chatter of other parents. Finding a rare moment when Jessica wasn't surrounded, I pulled her aside into the hallway, my voice barely a whisper. "Jessica, about my situation?" I began, the words catching in my throat. Before I could say more, her entire demeanor changed. Her voice, suddenly loud and sharp enough for several nearby guests to turn their heads, cut through the party noise. "Mom, can you not ruin the mood? Today is about the children for once." My face burned as if I'd been slapped. Every eye in the vicinity darted toward me, first with curiosity, then with a flicker of pity. With one sentence, she had painted me as a selfish old woman, obsessed with her own ailments, incapable of celebrating her own grandson's joy. I had to physically swallow the lump in my throat, force a brittle smile onto my face, and pretend to be fine for the rest of the afternoon. Later, when I gave Leo the sweater, he had just enough time to say, "Wow, Grandma," before Jessica whisked it from his hands. "This is beautiful, Mom," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'll just put it away for him so it doesn't get dirty." He never got to wear it. A few days after the party, I sat down at my desk to pay my electric bill online, as I'd done every month for years. I typed in my username and password for my bank account. "Login error." The screen flashed back at me in red letters. I tried again, carefully, thinking I must have made a mistake. "Login error." A third time, the same result. A vague sense of dread began to creep over me. I called Jessica. "Oh, that," she said, her voice so matter-of-fact it sent a chill down my spine. "I changed it. For your security. There's so much fraud online these days, Mom. It's better this way. From now on, if you need anything, just tell me, and I'll transfer the money or pay the bill for you. The money is safer where it is." I was speechless. I sat there, holding the phone to my ear, a dial tone buzzing in the silence. It was my pension, my money. The money Robert and I had worked our entire lives for, scraped and saved for, and now I had to ask permission to use it. The humiliation was a physical thing, a bitter taste in my mouth. I was no longer an independent adult. I was a child with an allowance, required to justify every small purchase to my own daughter. My last vestige of financial autonomy had been stripped away. That Sunday at church, Mrs. Carroll, a friend from my book club, caught up with me after the service. Her face was etched with genuine concern. "Sophia, dear, I've heard you haven't been well," she said, placing a gentle hand on my arm. Before I could utter a single word, Jessica, who had appeared at my side as if from nowhere, slipped her arm through mine, her grip surprisingly firm. She smiled brightly at Mrs. Carroll. "Oh, it's nothing serious," she chirped. "Mom's been fine, just a little forgetful and confused lately. You know how it is at her age." The lie was delivered with such sweetness, but it was more venomous than any curse. It wasn't just that she was silencing me. She was actively rewriting my reality for others. She was planting a seed of doubt about my mental competence in the minds of my friends. I saw the look in Mrs. Carroll's eyes shift from concern to pity. Jessica was building an invisible wall around me, brick by brick, lie by lie, isolating me from anyone who might offer help or worse. Believe me, the biggest blow, the one that nearly shattered me, came on a Thursday afternoon. The phone rang, and it was a nurse from Dr. Miller's office. Her voice was professional, a little hesitant. "Mrs. Sophia, I'm calling to confirm the family's request to shift focus to palliative care options." The words didn't make sense. It was like she was speaking a foreign language. "Palliative care? Who requested that?" I asked, my heart starting to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. There was a pause. The nurse cleared her throat. "Your daughter, a Jessica. She invoked her medical power of attorney." The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the linoleum floor. Jessica, my daughter, had used a legal document I'd signed years ago, trusting her implicitly, to decide that my life was no longer worth saving. She hadn't discussed it with me. She hadn't even told me. This wasn't carelessness anymore. This wasn't a lack of understanding. This was a betrayal so profound, so fundamental, it felt like the ground had fallen away beneath me. It was a quiet, bureaucratic attempt on my life. I sank to the floor, my back against the kitchen cabinets, the air stolen from my lungs. I didn't sleep that night. The ache in my chest felt worse, a sharp stabbing pain, though I suspected it had more to do with my breaking heart than any physical malady. The house was so dark, so quiet. Every creak of the old floorboard sounded like a footstep. Around 2 in the morning, gripped by a primal panic, I called Jessica. I don't know what I expected. An explanation? An apology? Maybe just the sound of another human voice to prove I wasn't completely alone in the world. When she answered, her voice was thick with sleep and annoyance. I didn't care. The words just tumbled out of me, carried on a wave of ragged sobs. "I'm scared, Jess," I whispered, the tears streaming down my face. "I'm so scared." I heard a frustrated noise on the other end of the line, a sharp exhalation of breath. "Oh, for God's sake, Mom, stop it!" she snapped, her voice cold and hard. "I don't have time for this melodrama." And then she hung up. The dial tone that followed, that steady, indifferent beep, 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 was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. It was colder and more final than death itself. In that moment, I felt an emptiness so complete it was bottomless. I wasn't just alone. I had been discarded, thrown away by the one person in the world I had loved the most. The house grew too quiet after that. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating presence. I missed the sound of my grandchildren's laughter, the joyful shrieks of Leo and Mia. I missed the feeling of their small hands in mine as we read storybooks, the sweet smell of the butter cookies I used to bake for them every weekend. I missed the way Mia would fall asleep on my lap, her little body warm and heavy, and how Leo would ask me endless questions about the birds in my garden. My love for them felt like the last, most fragile thread connecting me to Jessica. A foolish, hopeful part of me thought that maybe, for their sake, she might soften. With one last flicker of that hope, I picked up the phone. I wasn't calling to ask for anything, not for myself. I just wanted to see them. Would the children like to come visit their grandma this weekend? I asked, forcing a cheerful, airy tone into my voice. I just bought the mix for those buttermilk pancakes Leo loves so much. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint, rapid clicking of a keyboard. Jessica was working. "Mom," she said finally, her voice hesitant in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. I I don't think that's a good idea. The kids have been a little sensitive lately." Her voice then took on a tone of deep, feigned concern. "The gloomy atmosphere, all this talk about your health, I'm afraid it wouldn't be good for their emotional well-being." Every word was a carefully chosen shard of glass aimed directly at my heart. Jessica was using my own love for my grandchildren as a weapon against me. She was turning me into a toxic influence, a danger from which her innocent children had to be protected. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that nothing could hurt me more than revoking my right to be a grandmother. A few days later, she called again. This time her voice was bright, full of a false, manufactured excitement. "Mom, I've had the most wonderful idea," she announced. "Instead of you rattling around in that big old house all by yourself, why don't you sell it and move into the Golden Years community? They have nurses on site 24/7. You'd have much better care, and it would be such a load off my mind." Golden Years. I knew the place. I had a friend whose mother had lived and died there. I remembered the smell of disinfectant and overcooked broccoli, the rows of residents staring blankly at a television screen, the forced cheerfulness of the staff. I stood there, mute, as she went on about liquidating assets and optimizing expenses, as if she were discussing a stock portfolio. This house, this home that held a lifetime of memories with Robert, the house where I had raised her, where her height was still marked in faint pencil on a doorframe, was reduced to an asset that needed to be dealt with efficiently. After the call, I walked through the house as if seeing it for the first time. I ran my hand over the cool marble of the fireplace mantel, my fingers pausing on the silver frame holding my wedding photo. Me and Robert, so young and full of foolish, beautiful dreams. I sat down in his armchair, the worn leather sighing under my weight, the indentation still shaped to his body after all these years. I could almost smell the faint, lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. I walked into Jessica's old bedroom, where a few of her high school textbooks and faded honor roll certificates still sat on a shelf. This wasn't an asset. This was a vessel of memory. Selling it wouldn't just be selling a piece of property. It would be selling the soul of my family. It would be selling the proof that we had existed, that we had loved, that we had mattered. Jessica's idea wasn't a solution. It was an erasure, an attempt to neatly and efficiently delete my past, and by extension me, from her new, shiny life. I didn't call Jessica back right away. I needed time to think, to breathe. My silence seemed to agitate her. A text message appeared on my phone a day later. "Have you thought about my offer? It's the best option for everyone." For everyone. By which she meant for her. I realized then that we were no longer speaking the same language. I was speaking the language of love, memory, and connection. She was speaking the language of finance, convenience, and logistics. We were operating on two completely different frequencies. I looked out the window at the rose bushes Robert had planted, their blossoms a defiant splash of crimson against the green. No, I would not leave this place. This was my land. This was my last stand. That night, the familiar pain returned to my chest, a tight squeezing pressure. But this time, it didn't just bring fear. It brought with it a cold, startling clarity. I was not going to die in silence. I was not going to let my daughter write the final chapter of my life. I had spent my entire career as a teacher, drilling into children the importance of fairness and truth. Perhaps it was time to teach myself one final lesson. I sat down at the old wooden desk in the corner of the living room, switched on the lamp, and began to write. I wasn't writing a letter to Jessica. I was writing down everything that had happened. Every date, every conversation, every dismissive Sapphire, every cruel word. It wasn't a diary. It was a record. It was preparation for what I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones. I had to do next. It was a Saturday evening. I was curled up in Robert's armchair, scrolling idly on my tablet, a quiet habit I developed to make the evenings feel less empty. A gentle rain was falling outside, the soft rhythmic patter on the roof a soothing sound. I'd been looking at pictures posted by my friends in the local gardening club, vibrant photos of prize-winning roses and sprawling vegetable patches. For a few minutes, I felt a flicker of peace. I had made a conscious decision not to think about Jessica, not to dwell on my health. I just wanted to be present in that small, quiet moment. A warm mug of chamomile tea steamed gently on the end table beside me. I thought, for a brief, fleeting moment, that maybe I could get used to this fragile peace. And then I saw it. A new post from Jessica appeared at the top of my Facebook feed. My heart gave a painful lurch. It wasn't a picture of the children. It was a slick, professionally shot video. A luxury car, a brand I didn't even recognize, pearlescent white, gleamed under a bright sun. A giant red bow was tied around it, the kind you see in commercials at Christmas. The car was parked in the sweeping driveway of a magnificent villa, the kind of house I'd only ever seen in the glossy pages of magazines. As the video played, the front door of the villa opened, and Jessica's mother-in-law, Maria, stepped out, her face a mask of theatrical surprise. Jessica rushed forward to embrace her. I muted the video. I didn't need to hear the sounds of feigned astonishment and self-congratulation. The images were more than enough, but what truly twisted the knife was the caption Jessica had written beneath it. I had to read it 3 times, my brain refusing to process the words. Nothing is too much for the most wonderful mother in the world, who has always been my greatest inspiration. Happy birthday, Maria. You deserve the very best. My eyes scanned the comments below. Jessica's wealthy friends were cooing with admiration, speculating about the car's price. And there it was, in a comment from one of her friends, $250,000. $250,000. The number seemed to leap off the screen, mocking me, dancing in front of my eyes. $5,000. $250,000. I held the two numbers side by side in my mind. $5,000 for the life of her own mother. $250,000 for a birthday present for her husband's mother. What was the math on that? 50 times. My life was worth 1/50th of a luxury car. I felt a crushing pressure in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. It was the weight of a truth so monstrous it was hard to bear. This was no longer about carelessness or lack of funds. This was a choice. My daughter had placed my value on a scale, and I had been found wanting, weighing less than a machine of metal and glass. The rain outside began to fall harder, lashing against the windows. I sat there in the growing darkness, the tablet screen casting a cold blue light on my face. My tea had long gone cold. I tried to conjure a single happy memory of Jessica, some moment of warmth or tenderness to cling to, a reason to believe that this cruel stranger wasn't really her. But every memory was bleached, erased by the glaring image of that car and that caption, "The most wonderful mother in the world." If Maria was the most wonderful mother, then what was I? A failure? An unworthy mother? What had I done so wrong? I had poured my entire life into her, from hot meals on the table to the college tuition that Robert and I had taken out a second mortgage to pay for. All of it. For this. The physical pain in my chest seemed to recede, replaced by an encroaching, icy numbness, a profound emptiness. The tears wouldn't come. I didn't feel sad anymore. Sadness is for understandable losses. This was beyond understanding. The feeling was like a tree being struck by lightning. In one blinding, violent flash, every branch of hope, of love, of the capacity for forgiveness had been incinerated. All that was left was a scorched, hardened core. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my soul that I was no longer the Sophia I had been that morning. The mother who had loved her daughter unconditionally was gone. She had died in that armchair, and someone else, someone I didn't yet recognize, was being born from her ashes. It took me 2 days to be able to pick up the phone. 2 days of living in a numb, gray fog of disbelief and a pain so deep it was silent. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I just moved through the quiet rooms of my house. The image of that white car burned into my mind, but the numbness began to recede, and in its place something new began to grow. A cold, hard anger. It was an unfamiliar feeling for me, but it was clarifying. It was fuel. I knew I couldn't let this stand. I needed to hear her voice. I needed to hear her try to explain the inexplicable. I called her in the middle of the afternoon, a time I knew she usually had a short break between meetings. When she answered, her voice was still bright, still buzzing from the afterglow of her lavish party. "Mom, is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, marshaling my strength, willing my voice to remain steady. "Jessica," I said, "I saw your post about the car." I heard the immediate shift on the other end of the line. The cheerfulness evaporated, replaced by a wary, guarded silence. "It's a beautiful car," I continued, and I was surprised by the cold, level tone of my own voice. It must have been very expensive. I could picture her in her sleek, glass-walled office, pacing, searching for the right words, the right spin. "Mom," she began, her voice cautious, "it's a business thing. You wouldn't understand. It's an investment in the relationship." I cut her off. It was the first time in years I had ever interrupted her. "An investment? Jessica, I asked you for $5,000 to save my life, and you refused. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The silence stretched, taut and heavy. I knew I had backed her into a corner, and then the cornered animal attacked. The wall of her composure didn't just crack, it exploded in a shower of rage. "It's always about you, isn't it?" she screamed into the phone, her voice shrill and ugly. "Do you ever stop to think about me? Do you have any idea how hard I have to work? I have my own family to take care of, a social standing to maintain. I have to carry everything. Do you think you'd have the luxury of living your quiet little life if it weren't for me? Her words were like a hailstorm, nonsensical and cruel. She was twisting everything, trying to flip the narrative, to cast herself as the martyr and me as the selfish, ungrateful burden. You should be grateful instead of constantly criticizing me. That final sentence hung in the air like a judgment. Grateful? Grateful for being denied the means to live? Grateful for being valued less than a car? I didn't scream back. I just listened, my silence a stark contrast to her hysteria. My quiet seemed to infuriate her even more. She went on, a torrent of accusations about her sacrifices, the pressures she was under, how I could never possibly understand her life. And with every word she threw at me, instead of feeling hurt, my mind grew clearer, sharper. I realized this wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. Jessica wasn't talking to me. She was talking to herself, desperately trying to justify her actions, to convince herself she was the hero of her own story. She needed me to be the villain. She needed me to be the demanding, ungrateful mother so she could continue to live in her gilded world without the stain of guilt. In the torrent of her anger, I finally saw the simple, devastating truth. It wasn't that she didn't love me. It was that she no longer had the capacity to. The love she once had for me had become an inconvenience, a relic of a past that no longer fit the blueprint of her new life. When she finally paused, breathless from her own tirade, I spoke just 2 words. My voice was calm, devoid of any emotion. I understand. And then I hung up. I didn't give her a chance to respond. I understand. It didn't mean I agreed. It didn't mean I forgave. It meant that I saw. I saw her for who she truly was. I saw my own position in her life with perfect, painful clarity. And I saw the path I had to take. The internal battle was over. The grief, the anguish, the self-blame, it all vanished. All that remained was a cold, hard resolve. The game was over. It was time for justice. After that phone call, the house was no longer a home. It became a tomb. The silence was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. Every object seemed to have lost its color. Robert's armchair was no longer a place of warm memories. It was just a vacant piece of furniture. I moved from room to room like a ghost, aimless and hollowed out. The ache in my chest seemed to have merged with the ache in my soul, and I could no longer tell them apart. I felt like I was fading, being slowly erased from my own life. That Sunday, I went to church out of habit, a lifetime of routine carrying my body forward when my spirit could not. I sat in my usual pew, the familiar scent of old wood and candle wax doing nothing to comfort me. I tried to listen as Father Michael spoke of forgiveness and grace, but his words were like water on oil. They slid right off me, unable to penetrate the thick layer of my despair. I looked up at the crucifix above the altar, at the image of suffering that had always brought me comfort, and for the first time in my 68 years, I felt nothing, just a vast, silent emptiness. I prayed. I begged God for a sign, for a sliver of strength, for some indication that I wasn't utterly alone. But all I received in return was silence. The feeling of being abandoned by God was somehow even more terrifying than being abandoned by my own child. I returned home to the empty house, the questions beginning to swarm in my mind. I had lived my entire life by the rules. I had followed the teachings, love thy neighbor, Honor thy mother and father. Be kind, be giving. I had believed, with the simple faith of a child, that a good life would be a protected life. But here I was, facing my own death, betrayed by the person I loved most in the world, and my faith was crumbling to dust. Was it all meaningless? Was kindness just another word for weakness? I sat in the darkness as the questions tore at me, eroding the very foundation of my soul. In my desperation, I reached for my last remaining comfort, my books. My hand found the familiar, worn spine of the Maya Angelou collection. I opened it to a random page, but my eyes were so blurred with unshed tears that I couldn't make out the words. I just sat there, clutching the book to my chest as if it were a life raft. I thought of her voice, the rich, powerful cadence I'd heard in interviews, a voice that held the weight of a life lived through unimaginable hardship. She didn't speak of a life without pain. She spoke of rising, of finding your own song even from within a cage. Sitting there, in what felt like my darkest hour, I wondered what kept a spirit like hers from breaking. Was it faith? Was it art? Was it love? I want to ask you, my friends who are listening to this, when you have faced trials that felt insurmountable, where did you find your strength? Was it in a prayer, a song, a book, or the memory of a loved one? Please share your source of strength in the comments. You never know when your story might be the flicker of candlelight that someone else needs in the dark. And then, as if in answer, a memory surfaced, clear and vivid. It was Robert, in the last months of his battle with cancer. He never once complained. Every single morning, no matter how weak he was, he would insist on shaving, putting on a clean shirt, and smiling at me. I remember sitting by his bedside, the beep of the machines a constant rhythm in the room, and he reached out and took my hand. His was so thin, but his grip was firm. "We have to fight, Sophia," he used to say, his voice thin, but his eyes fierce. Not because we aren't scared, but because we can't let the fear win. The memory of him, of his quiet, unshakable dignity, sent a tiny pulse of warmth through my frozen heart. I wasn't alone. I had his legacy. I owed it to him, and I owed it to myself to fight. I would not let the fear win. That Thursday was my book club meeting. I didn't want to go, but the memory of Robert's resolve pushed me out the door. We were discussing a novel about a woman whose husband's family cheated her out of her inheritance. But instead of surrendering, she taught herself the law and took them to court. As I listened to my friends analyze the character's courage, her tenacity, one of them, Eleanor, said something that struck me. It wasn't about the money for her, she said. It was about refusing to be erased. That phrase, refusing to be erased, lit a fire in me. This wasn't just a fictional story. It was a possibility that an ordinary person, someone who had been dismissed and underestimated, could still have a voice under the law. I couldn't sleep that night. I turned on the television, the flickering blue light a companion in the dark room. I flipped aimlessly through the channels until I landed on a local news station. During a commercial break, an ad came on. It was for a small law firm specializing in elder rights. A woman with a kind, serious face appeared on the screen, speaking about protecting vulnerable seniors from financial and emotional abuse. "You are not alone," she said, looking directly into the camera. My hand shot out, fumbling on the nightstand for a pen and a scrap of paper. I scribbled down the phone number just as the commercial ended. The piece of paper sat on my nightstand, the number practically glowing in the dark. It felt like a challenge. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. I needed to talk to Robert. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and freshly cut grass. I sat on the ground beside his headstone, pulling away a few stray weeds and wiping the granite clean with my handkerchief. I told him everything about Jessica, the car, the fear, the crushing loneliness. "What do I do, Robert?" I whispered to the silent stone. "Am I strong enough to do this?" Of course there was no answer, but in the peaceful quiet of that place, with the wind rustling the leaves of the old oak tree nearby, I could almost hear his voice in my mind, as clear as if he were sitting beside me. "Do the right thing, Sophia. Do the thing you won't regret." And the right thing wasn't silence. It wasn't suffering. When I got home, I went into the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. I looked, really looked, at my own reflection. I saw the wrinkles etched around my eyes, the silver in my hair, the weariness in my gaze. But as I looked deeper, I saw something else. I saw the eyes of a teacher who had dedicated 30 years to shaping young minds. I saw the hands of a wife who had cared for her husband until his last breath. I saw the heart of a mother who had loved unconditionally. I was not a pathetic old woman. I was a survivor, and a survivor does not surrender. With a newfound sense of purpose, I walked to the desk, picked up the phone, and dialed the number from the scrap of paper. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but when the receptionist answered, my voice was steady. "Davis and Associates, how may I help you?" "Hello," I said, the words feeling momentous. "My name is Sophia. I'd like to make an appointment with Miss Davis." That one sentence felt like I had moved a mountain. I had turned a thought into an action. While I waited for the day of my appointment, I started to gather everything. The medical file from Dr. Miller, the bank statements showing my small, fixed pension, the text messages from Jessica, and most importantly, I printed out a color copy of the screenshot from her Facebook page, the picture of the $250,000 car with its obscene red bow. I placed everything neatly into an old manila folder. The act of organizing the chaotic mess of papers felt like organizing my own mind. The confusion, the pain, the self-doubt, it was all being transformed into a quiet, orderly file of evidence, silent but heavy with the weight of truth. The morning of the appointment, I woke up before my alarm clock. I must have stood in front of my closet for a full half hour, trying to decide what to wear. I wanted to look respectable, not pitiful, dignified. I finally chose a simple floral dress and the cardigan Robert had given me on our last anniversary. It felt like a thin, soft layer of armor. My hands were clammy as I gripped the steering wheel on the drive downtown, my own reflection a pale, determined face in the rearview mirror. I kept asking myself if I was doing the right thing, if I was about to tear my own family apart for good. Miss Davis's office was in a tall glass building in the heart of the city, a world away from my quiet neighborhood of small houses and manicured lawns. Everything was polished and hushed and serious. A young receptionist offered me a glass of water and led me to a waiting area with expensive leather chairs. The air smelled of clean carpets and ambition. I felt small and out of place, watching other clients in business suits walk by with confident strides. For a terrifying moment, I almost got up and walked out. "Mrs. Sophia?" A warm voice broke through my anxiety. Miss Davis was not what I had expected. She wasn't cold or intimidating. She was a woman in her 50s, with intelligent, compassionate eyes. She led me to her office, a cozy room lined with books and a few family photos. She didn't sit behind her massive desk, creating a barrier between us. Instead, she gestured to two small armchairs in the corner. "Please, take your time," she said, her voice gentle. "Tell me your story." And for the first time in so long, I felt like someone was actually ready to listen. So I told her. I started from the beginning, with Dr. Miller's diagnosis. As I spoke, the tightness in my chest began to loosen. I told her about the phone calls with Jessica, the hidden glasses, the lies at church, and finally, the $250,000 car. As I laid it all out piece by piece, my pain was no longer a chaotic mess of feelings inside me. It became a narrative, a sequence of events with a clear, undeniable logic. Miss Davis listened without interrupting, her expression calm and focused, occasionally jotting down a note. There was a strange, healing power in speaking my truth to an impartial outsider, in having my reality heard without judgment. When I finished, a quiet moment settled over the room. "Mrs. Sophia," Miss Davis finally said, her voice clear and firm, "what your daughter has done is not just thoughtless. Legally, it constitutes emotional and financial abuse. You have every right to seek help and protection." Abuse. Hearing the word spoken aloud by a lawyer in that quiet, serious office gave it a weight and a reality it hadn't had before. It validated everything I had been feeling. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was a victim, and I had the right to seek justice. Miss Davis explained the next steps: a formal letter that would be sent, the possibility of mediation, and if necessary, going to court. She slid a document across the small table toward me. It was a legal retainer agreement. I looked down at the blank line at the bottom of the page, waiting for my name. I picked up the pen she offered me. My hand was no longer shaking. When I signed my name, Sophia, it was more than just a signature. It was a declaration, a promise to Robert, to my own fractured faith, and to myself. I would no longer be a victim. From this moment on, I was a fighter. After the lawyer's letter was sent, a few days passed in a tense, unnerving silence. I tried to keep busy, tending my roses, reading, calling friends, but my nerves were stretched taut, waiting for the inevitable snap. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt into my throat. Every car that slowed down on my street made me jump. I knew this was the calm before the storm. Jessica would not accept this quietly. She would fight back, and she would aim for where it hurt the most. The call came in the evening. I saw her name flash on the screen. I took a deep, steadying breath and answered. Her voice wasn't screaming with rage like the last time. It was something far more terrifying. It was ice cold. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked, forgoing any greeting. "Do you think a letter from some second-rate lawyer is going to scare me?" I said nothing, following the instructions Miss Davis had given me. "You listen to me," she continued, her voice a low hiss. "If you move forward with this," she said, and each word was a carefully aimed dart, "you will never see Leo and Mia again. Do you understand me? Never." The air rushed out of my lungs. My grandchildren, my only joy. She knew my weakest point, the one thing I couldn't bear to lose. She was using them as hostages, putting my love for them on the negotiating table. I'll tell them their grandmother did a terrible, selfish thing. I'll tell them you don't love them anymore. She wasn't finished. And I will tell the court that you're incompetent, she went on, her voice dripping with venom, that you've lost your mind, that you're delusional. I have the money to hire the best lawyers, the best doctors to prove it. I will destroy you, Mom. I will turn you into a crazy old woman that nobody believes. Trust me. This threat was even more cruel. It wasn't just about family. It was about my honor, my dignity, my very identity. Everything I had been my entire life. When she hung up, I was trembling uncontrollably. A tidal wave of fear washed over me. The thought of never holding my grandchildren again, of my friends and neighbors looking at me with pity and doubt. It was almost enough to make me break. I cried then, hot tears of absolute terror. But through the panic, I remembered Miss Davis's words. I called her, my voice breaking. She listened calmly as I sobbed out Jessica's threats. Sophia, she said, her voice a steady anchor, this is the sound of a desperate person. These are empty threats. They only prove that we are on the right path. Stay strong. After the call, I sat alone in my living room, my gaze fixed on the framed photo of Leo and Mia on the mantelpiece, their two smiling, innocent faces. Jessica's words echoed in my head, but another thought rose to meet them. What is the legacy I want to leave for these children? A grandmother who silently endured injustice? Or a grandmother who stood up for her own dignity? It made me think, and I want to ask you all, what is the most important legacy you want to leave for your children and grandchildren? Is it money and possessions? Or is it the values you live by, the lessons of resilience and self-respect? Please, let me know your thoughts in the comments. That night, looking at their picture, I knew my answer. This fight wasn't just for me anymore. It was for them. The legal battle wasn't like what you see in the movies. There were no dramatic courtroom showdowns. It was a slow, grueling war of attrition fought with letters, phone calls, and long, exhausting meetings with my lawyer. It was draining. But there was one profound difference in this fight. I was no longer alone. Miss Davis and her team were by my side, handling the paperwork, explaining every step in plain English. All I had to do was provide the truth and hold on to my nerve. Slowly, meticulously, the fear inside me was replaced by a quiet, stubborn patience. Finally, faced with the very real possibility of a public court case that would expose her actions, Jessica agreed to mediation. We didn't meet face to face. Everything was handled through our lawyers. There was no apology offered, no remorse expressed. There were only numbers and terms, negotiated with cold, professional detachment. In the end, she agreed to pay the full $5,000 for my medical expenses and an additional sum as compensation for the emotional distress she had caused. A week later, I was in my kitchen, watering the African violet on the windowsill, when my phone made a soft ting sound. It was a notification from my bank. A deposit had been made to my account. I looked at the number. It didn't bring me a rush of joy or a sense of vindictive pleasure. It brought only one overwhelming feeling: relief. It was as if an invisible, crushing weight I had been carrying for months had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Justice, it turned out, wasn't loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet ting in an empty kitchen, a silent acknowledgement that the truth has been seen. With the money, I scheduled the surgery immediately. I wasn't afraid anymore. As I lay on the operating table, A strange sense of calm settled over me, and when I woke up in the recovery room, the first thing I was aware of was a steady, strong, rhythmic beat in my chest. "The pacemaker is working perfectly, Mrs. Sophia," a smiling nurse told me. I placed my hand over my heart. It wasn't just the beat of a machine, it was the beat of my life reclaimed, the beat of a heart that had refused to be broken. It was the sound of victory. I didn't use the compensation money for myself. I divided it into two parts. The first half I placed into a college savings fund for Leo and Mia in their names. I never wanted money to be a weapon in my family again. I wanted it to be a gift of love with no strings attached. The other half I donated to the local senior advocacy center, the one that helps people in situations just like mine who don't have the resources to fight back. I walked into their small, busy office and handed them the check. I didn't give them my name. I just told them it was from someone who understood. It was my way of turning my private pain into something with a public purpose. My daughter had spent a fortune on a car for a woman she called the most wonderful mother in the world. But I had learned that my worth wasn't for her or anyone else to decide. I had found my own value, not in a grand gesture, but in a quiet, steady heartbeat. And I knew, with a peace that settled deep in my soul, that was more than enough. My daughter had spent a fortune on a car for a woman she called the most wonderful mother in the world. But I had learned that my worth wasn't for her or anyone else to decide. I had found my own value, not in a grand gesture, but in a quiet, steady heartbeat. And I knew, with a peace that settled deep in my soul, that was more than enough. Sharing this with you all has been a journey in itself, and I feel a connection to each and every one of you who has taken the time to listen. I know that when we sit together like this, stories can flow like a stream. Today, I wanted to open my heart a little, and I would be so honored to hear the stories of all the mothers and grandmothers listening. You know, sometimes just a click on a screen, a like, a subscribe, or a share might seem like a small, fleeting gesture to many. But to me, and to other quiet voices that need to be shared, each one of those clicks is a tiny ray of light in the darkness. It's a quiet way of saying, I see you, I hear you, your story matters. It reminds me that we are not invisible. A simple click from you is a powerful declaration of support for me, and it's the motivation for me to continue sharing these stories. After my story has been told, something has changed within me. For weeks, all I wanted was for someone to listen to my heart. And now that you have listened, I realize that what I want most now is to listen to your hearts. Down below, in the comments section, I would be so honored if you would share a piece of your story with me. Tell me about a time you felt unheard. Tell me about a passion that others sometimes dismissed as silly. Or tell me about a moment you found your strength, even in the quietest, smallest way. I will read them. I will carry them with me, because your stories matter. We want to build Sapphire Revenge as a community where we can share these hidden stories from the bottom of our hearts. I know you will have your own private stories that can sometimes be difficult to share with family or friends. I am here to listen, to share in your joys and sorrows, because we always have the right to be respected, to be heard. If you don't have sad stories like the one I've been through, then please share your happy ones, like what joy you received today. Please share with me. That will be an abundant source of motivation, helping me and the other viewers watching this video to heal, to find faith and motivation in life. If you are watching on your television, don't hesitate to pick up your phone and search for my channel, Sapphire Revenge. I so hope to share these feelings with you. Let's build a community together where we can share our feelings in the most sincere way. Let's make this a place where we listen to each other, a place where no woman has to feel that her life, her struggles, and her triumphs are invisible. Thank you once again for sitting with me. It means the world.